Hi everyone, Mistress Sweet Pea here with another podcast today. I hope everyone is having a fabulous day, and I'm so grateful that everyone's tuned in today to watch. I am going to be talking about something different today. Today we're going to talk about Women's History Month, which is a topic that's really important to me as a woman, but also as a whole in society. Is a topic that I feel doesn't get the attention it deserves. So on that note, grab a cup of coffee, relax, and enjoy the podcast. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. We're going to go and dive into Women's History Month. Again, this is a topic that I am extremely passionate about, but at the same time I feel doesn't get the recognition it deserves. And it's about time it does. So Women's History Month began as a local Women's History Week in Santa Rosa, California, back in 1978. It was basically pushed to recognize women activists and historians to the National Women's History Project, and became a month-long event that was observed in 1987 through a congressional act. So we're going to talk a little bit about women's history, the movement, how it initiated. We'll focus on a few women who made a tremendous impact on that history and possibly the future of what it holds for us women and for all women. So we're going to dive into this today. So every March in the United States, Women's History Month honors the contributions of women and what women have made to the American history, culture, public life, and social changes. It's recognized each year by the presidential proclamation, and in 2026, President Donald J. Trump officially proclaimed March 2026 as Women's History Month. But this observance didn't appear overnight. This was a long overdue process, and it was something that was in the making for quite some time. It grew out of frustration, persistence, and a very basic question. Why were so many women missing out of our history books? Why weren't they talked about enough? When I was in school back in the early 80s, elementary school I should say, even going on to junior high and high school, we didn't have a lot of women in history information in our textbooks. It was mostly men. And again, I'm not trying to pinpoint men are better than women or vice versa. That's not the part of this. That's not a discussion I'm having. I just don't understand why women were not more profound. And maybe in some of the schools that you guys have gone to, they were, and that's great. And kudos to that. That's perfect. But there are some schools out there that don't honor, the teachers don't teach about Women's History Month. So there's a lot of wonderful women historians, women, activists out there that made an impact. Some of these women, if it wasn't for some of these women, women wouldn't have the right to vote. We wouldn't have the right to own a checking account. We wouldn't have the right to become a doctor like a man can. Our roles would be diminished, and men would be here and we would still be down here. I mean, we're not up here yet. We're almost there. We're probably getting there. But again, that was the question. Why were women missing from history textbooks? Today we'll trace that story. We're going to go back and we're going to start what Women's History Month is. That's the first segment of our show. So Women's History Month is an annual observation, again, each March of every year to honor women in history. Federal institutions such as the Library of Congress, National Archives, and the Smithsonian all treat this time of study, all treat it as a time of study and public programming. That matters because history is not just looking at the past, it reshapes what society values in the present so basically when women's stories are absent from textbook, museums, public memories, or any narratives of any stories, that absence sends a message about who counts and who doesn't count. So right now it's like, I feel like women don't count. We don't have a say, and we should have a say. The founders of the Women's History Month argue that the correct in that omission was not only symbolic, it was part of telling the truth. There's all these women activists out there from previous generations. You have to really read up about them to know what impact they've made. They've women, it wouldn't have been, we wouldn't be this far in society if it wasn't for these activists and these historians. They've made such an impact on our lives. So again, this started, again, to recap, it started in 1978 in Santa Rosa, California, and then President Donald J. Trump made it March 2026, and going forward, every March, a National Women's History Month will be the month of March. So basically, they placed it during the week of March 8th to connect it with International Women's Day, which that's another topic for another time, but just to briefly note, that's also doesn't get any recognition either, International Women's Day. I have friends in Italy that they celebrate that. I know people that take their wives out for International Women's Day to honor women. But here in the United States, we don't have that. And if we do, it's not televised. It's not even mentioned in the news. Whereas in Italy, they talk about it. They mention it. It's part of their, they don't focus heavily on it, but they talk about it. They don't talk about it here. It's kind of a slap in the face for women when you really think about it. Like, why can't we have a day for a Women's Day here? They have it over in Europe, but they don't celebrate it here. So the idea for this Women's History Month caught on quickly, and other communities started organizing their own Women's Day. Women's History Week, I should say. They even had events proving that the demand for this kind of public recognition is important, not only as a whole, but for women as well. The local beginning is important because it reminds us that national observance also starts from grassroots, which starts from the beginning. These women have made a tremendous impact in our lives as a whole and for every woman out there. So before Congress passed resolutions and the president signed proclamations, teachers, organizers, historians, and community activists have already built the case from the ground up. So who started this movement? The local Sonoma County celebration became a national campaign through the efforts of historians, educators, and activists, especially those who formed the National History Women's Month. They also became known as the National Women's History Alliance group. The organization, again based in Santa Rosa, California, was started by women's history activists, including Molly Murphy McGregor, Mary Ruthstauder, Maria Cuevas, Paula Hammett, and Betty Morgan. Their work focused on the biggest problem that happened at the time, which is still, in my opinion, to this day. Women were largely absent from textbooks in mainstream historical teaching. Teachers were not talking about women in history and the impact they made. They were focusing on men who did, and again, there's nothing wrong with what men did in history. They did some really good stuff. But what about women? Where's the women? Why aren't we talked about? What about our accomplishments? What about what we've done to help shape and impact society? The movement also drew strength from wider fields of women's scholars. One prominent historian was Gerda Lerner, who helped champion the idea that women's experiences belonged at the center of this historical study rather than at the margins. In 1980, a coalition was led by the National Women's History Project, which lobbied for national recognition. At the time, former President Jimmy Carter then issued the first presidential proclamation declaring the week of March 8th, 1980 as the National History Women's Week. 1 week does not do us any justice, and I'm glad we have a month because there is a lot that women have done in history. Now back in World War II, when the men were out fighting, women were home taking care of the kids. Women had to go to the workforce. They had to go and help support the economy, keep the economy going. They supported not only some women supported the war, some women had to work because they had to provide for their family. Who was going to do it when their husband is out fighting a war? So again, Stuff like that is not talked about, and it should be in the textbooks. We need future generations of our children to be able to understand, not just women, but men and women, to understand what a profound impact we've had on society, as well as men. We shouldn't be overlooked. So, the deeper roots about Women's History Month. Even though the observance itself is modern, the history goes much, much further back. One foundational milestone was the Seneca Falls Convention back in New York on July 19th and 20th of 1848. The National Park Service describes it as the first women's rights convention. Again, 1848, a 2-day convention. That's amazing. Seneca Falls mattered because it helped launch an organized women's rights movement in the United States. It connected demands for equality, for public organizing, speeches, declarations, and reform networks. So from there, the movement from women's suffrage stretched across for decades. So according to the National Archives, the 19th Amendment guaranteed women had the right to vote, yes. But achieving it required a long and difficult struggle that included lecturing, write-ins, marching, lobbyists, and civil disobedience. So I'm not sure, I'm sure YouTube has some videos about some of that back in the day. I highly suggest checking it out. So we had to fight. We had to become disobedient. We had to march, write letters, lecture. We had to struggle to get our word out there that, hey, we're important too, just like men. We're just as important. But again, it's not talked about in textbooks, which is not good. Every child should know, every boy and girl should understand what an impact both men and women have had on society. I mean, the problem is everyone's so focused on men and what they've done. And again, men have done great work. Men have gotten us through battles. They've gotten us through a lot of stuff. A lot of the things we have today, men have helped make that possible. But so have women. Women have done a lot. But again, that's overlooked, and it shouldn't be. So this longer backdrop, because Women's History Month is not just a celebration of famous individuals, it's also a recognition of collective struggle, the kind that takes generations and generations to go through. So now we're going to talk about the impact across the decades. So what did Women's History Month actually change? What changed for us women? First, it changed education. The movement emerged in part because activists saw that women's contributions were missing from textbook and classrooms instructions. So by creating annual observances, teachers' materials, public programs, and historical themes, women's history advocates pushed schools and institutions to broaden the story of America. Broaden the story by including women and what women have done for this country. Second, it helped normalize women's history as a legitimate and necessary field of study. You can go now to college and study, and there's an actual course. You can get a degree in women's studies. That's great. We didn't have that like decades ago. That wasn't even possible. So that's great. Institutions such as the Smithsonian, Library of Congress now build programming around women's achievements, showing how much the field has moved from margins towards the center of public history. Third, it provides public platform for connecting the past and the present. So Women's History Month often highlights unfinished work in law, education, economics, and civil rights, linking historical recognition with current policy debates and social issues. If we break the impact down decade by decade, a clearer picture will start to emerge. Like, for example, in the 1970s, the push began in local education and community organizations, especially in responses to women's underrepresentation in the curriculum. So in the 1970s, we're like, hey, Why aren't we talked about in the curriculum? Why aren't kids learning about what we've done? I mean, we've had impact. We've had huge impact. Why isn't that mentioned in textbooks? Then we go into the 1980s. The movement achieved national legitimacy through presidential proclamation and congressional resolutions. So basically, culminating the creation of Women's History Month in 1987. By the 1990s, annual proclamations and broader institutional support helped march a regular pact of civil and educational life. And then by the 2000s and 2010s, museums, archives, digital projects, and expanded school library access to women's history studies and stories. So basically, by the time the 2000s and 2010s came along, you could go into a library and they would have a section devoted to women's studies, women in history, and what they have done. By the 2020s, the observance continued to serve both a national celebration and remembers those who have made an impact in society as a whole. The National Women's History Alliance recent themes emphasize intergenerational leadership and systematic change. And you have to remember, so the impact's not just a big month-long ceremony. Women's History Month also helped to reshape the public memory. So it put in people's minds that, hey, yeah, a man did this, and, you know, that's great. And it is great. But what about women? Now women have a place. We have a voice. We can say, look, this is what we've done to help reshape society, help give women a voice to be heard. And I highly recommend looking at some of these YouTube videos. I've seen some of them when I was doing my research for this topic. It's absolutely amazing what they've got out there. I mean, it is hard to find. You do have to kind of maneuver your search criteria a little bit, but there's quite a bit out there. I highly recommend checking it out when you have the time. So now we're going to turn to some of the women whose lives and work transformed history. I mean, this is not a complete list. The number of women that have made such an impact on our society, we could go on for hours. I mean, that's how many there are. But we're going to just narrow it down to just a few today. So the first one we're going to talk about is, her name is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So her contributions to women's rights, she co-organized, I can't even talk without my coffee. So on that note, let's take a quick minute. My coffee is what gets me going. So anyways, I digressed. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she was one of the women who co-organized the Seneca Falls Convention back in 1848. She was the author of the Declaration of Sentiments, outlining the grievances and demands for women's equality. She advocated for women's suffrage, emphasizing the right that women have the right to vote. She co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869 to promote women's rights and including voting rights as well. She worked closely with other activists to advance the women's movement, to make it more stronger and more progressive. She championed broader social reforms. She included the abolition and labor rights, linking them to women's issues. She was born on November 12, 1815, and she died on October 26, 1902 in New York City. She was one of the most wonderful women who started this whole organization. And you have to remember, back in the days, women were considered second-class citizens. We weren't allowed to own a home back in the days. We weren't allowed to own a checking account. All of our if we did work, it went to our husband because they paid the bills back in the day. Women have come a long way since then, and I'm happy about that, because women are more than just having children and taking care of the house. And if women like to do that, that's fine. Every woman has a right to like what they want. But it's also nice to know that women have a place in society. We can become doctors, we can become educators, we can become anything we want in this world, because we just have to educate ourselves and continue to educate. I've struggled with my learning, but I didn't give up. And that's the thing. Women never should give up. Keep fighting the fight. Keep learning. Keep staying educated. Make a impact in your life, in society, and just keep fighting, because we're all in this together. But we've come a long way, so we don't need to fight that much, but we still need to kind of be observant of what's going on. On that note, another person, her name is Lucretia Mott. She was born in 1793 and passed away in 1880. She was one of the early feminist activists of her time and a strong advocate for ending slavery. She was an orator. She just dedicated her life to speaking out against racial and gender injustice. She is one hell of a woman. She is amazing, absolutely amazing. She's from Nantucket Island, Massachusetts, and she was raised a Quaker, a religion that stressed equality of all people, but she also fought strongly against ending slavery, but at the same time, she also was a feminist and wanted women to have a place in society where they can freely express themselves. She was one of the, because of her pushing to end slavery, she was one of those that helped with the Anti-Slavery Society of the 1830s, which encouraged women's participation as writers and speakers in the anti-slavery movement. So she was one of the founders of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society in 1833. I've read her history, and this woman is amazing. The stuff that she has done is just amazing. Then we have someone that I'm sure most of you know already, Susan B. Anthony. You know this, the coin for the dollar bill that says Susan B. Anthony. She is the co-founder of the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869 to advocate the right for women to vote. She played a huge role in women's suffrage movements, campaigning time and time again, tirelessly for equal rights for women. She gave speeches, organized events, raised awareness about the fact that women were not allowed to vote. Women were not deemed to have a place in society. She fought to have that fixed. So she also helped author the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. Although it was passed, regardless. She helped get that on the ballot to get that vote passed, so women can vote. And I love that. That was amazing. She was also the fight for gender. She fought for gender equality and social justice. Again, if it wasn't for these women in history, we wouldn't be where we are today as a society for women. So there's a lot to be said there for that. And then there's other women in history. And again, the one that I will mention that really means a lot, one of them, they all mean a lot to me, Rosa Parks. That movement back with not giving up her seat on the bus. I love that story. That was, her activism represented disciplined, sustained civil rights work, included hers in a women's history, as well as ongoing struggle for equal citizenship. And again, that's more of a racial issue, which we will discuss at another podcast. But Rosa Parks is also one that is an amazing person as well, that I put in line with all the other ones. So another way to understand the impact of women's history is to look at it as a legal change. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 prohibits sex-based wage discrimination between men and women performing equally the same job. So a male doctor is paid, let's say, $100,000 a year. Well, a woman doctor should be paid the same amount. Thank you for this Equal Pay Act from 1963. If it wasn't for that, women would have to keep breaking that glass ceiling to get up and up and up, and we shouldn't have to do that. We are just as capable as any man out there. We should be allowed to make as much as a man, and we've come along. Women have come a long way. Our fight is not over yet. We still have more to do, but it has improved. It has improved tremendously since the beginning. Then came the Education Amendments of 1972, which prohibits sex discrimination in federally funded education programs and activities. The influence of this has reached academics, athletics, admissions, and campus. So basically, women having a right to a higher education at a college of their choice won't be denied based on their gender. And some people ask whether Women's History Month is still necessary because women have now made an impact on society. Some people say, well, why should we continue to celebrate it? Well, we should. We should honor those women who came before us. If it wasn't for their action, their integrity, their drive, their eagerness to make an impactful change in the lives of women, we would probably still be in that same spot today. Maybe worse, who knows? We don't know. But we need to at least be able to thank those women for what they've done, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have what we have today. So the future, where does the future hold? Again, President Donald Trump declared March 2026 and going forward, every March, a Women's History Month. So we still have that. It's basically, I'm glad we have that. The future is likely to involve more digital storytelling. As we go into an age of more technology and more advanced technology, we're going to have more local history recovery, more attention to other intersectionality, more about girls and women shaping the world in real time. There'll be more, we'll still have that month of women's history, but it'll take more of a digital aspect. So in closing today, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, and I appreciate your time, and you guys are amazing. I love my audience. I love you all, and I want everyone to just be kind to each other, help each other, lend a hand, and I will catch you all on the next time.